You know, when we think about health and wellness, our minds usually jump to science, diet, and fitness, right? But what if we looked somewhere else for answers? Today, we're going to dive into the wisdom of some of the great saints and doctors of the church to explore a totally different kind of diagnosis for our well-being. And believe me, it all starts from a pretty surprising place.
So let's start with this kind of radical idea. What if you looked at our entire human experience not just as, a series of events, but as a long-term illness that needs a cure? Now, this isn't about being down or pessimistic. It's actually a really powerful metaphor that's been used for centuries to help us understand who we really are.
Okay, so if we're all dealing with this condition, that makes humanity, well, the universal patient.
And check out this image from St. Augustine. He doesn't just see a bunch of sick individuals. No, he sees the entire human race as one single great patient, just lying there, stretched across the whole world, waiting for a great doctor to show up. It's a massive, profound way to think about our shared condition.
All right, so every patient needs a diagnosis. And in this spiritual way of looking at things, the diagnosis is, well, it's complex. It involves a lot more than just our physical bodies.
St. Jerome just gets right to the heart of it with this one. He's laying out a really clear hierarchy here. Look, he's saying physical health matters, of course, but the health of the soul, that's on another level. He's arguing that spiritual pain is just so much more serious than any physical ache or pain. And here's a more modern diagnosis, something that might feel really familiar. St. Josemaría Escrivá called it spiritual schizophrenia. He's talking about this tendency we have to live a divided life, right? We have our faith life over here, and then our work, family, and social life in a completely separate box. He saw that split as a serious spiritual illness for modern times.
This is such a powerful paradox that St. John Chrysostom points out. Think about it. We fight so hard against physical diseases, even the ones doctors say are incurable, right? We hope for a miracle. But when it comes to our souls, where he says no disease is truly incurable, we often just give up. We neglect ourselves. Why do we neglect the one part of us that can always be healed?
So, if we're the patient and we've got our diagnosis, that leaves one big question. Who's the doctor? Well, in this tradition, the answer is crystal clear: the divine physician.
The Catechism itself presents Christ as the ultimate physician, the one who cares for both our spiritual and our physical health. And this is key. His work of healing didn't just stop 2,000 years ago. It's meant to be continued, right here and now, through his church.
And if you build on that idea, the whole thing starts to look like a complete system of care. The church is seen as a kind of hospital for the soul. The sacraments, that's the main medicine they prescribe. You've got the Eucharist, which is like this life-giving spiritual food, and penance, which is the direct remedy for our spiritual wounds. It's all right there.
Now, it's easy to hear all this advice from saints and think, well, sure, but they were different. They were superhuman. But St. Josemaría Escrivá pushes back on that hard. He's like, abnormal? No way. They were made of flesh and blood, just like you and me.
And that's the crucial point. Their advice isn't some abstract theory from an ivory tower. It comes from the real, lived experiences of normal people who had to struggle and fight through life just like we do. They weren't clinical cases to be put under a microscope. They were fighters, and their wisdom is practical, forged in the trenches.
So that brings us to the really practical part. What is the actual prescription? What are the steps these spiritual doctors say we should take to find that holistic health?
It really boils down to three essential parts. First, a balanced, moderate discipline for your body. Second, something we could call mental hygiene. And third, making consistent use of the spiritual remedies available to us.
Okay, first up, moderation. This one might actually surprise you. St. Francis de Sales warns against going to extremes with physical austerity. He even uses St. Bernard, a huge saint, as a cautionary tale. He says Bernard later regretted being too hard on his own body because it actually made him less able to help and serve other people. The goal is balance, not burning yourself out.
Second is mental hygiene. And this is incredible because long before we had mindfulness apps and wellness gurus, St. Josemaría was talking about how important it is to manage your own thoughts. His advice is so direct. Just banish those useless, distracting thoughts, because at the very least, they're just a waste of your time and energy.
And third, the spiritual remedies. This is about that journey to become a better person. And I absolutely love this analogy from St. Josemaría. He says, look, even a doctor who is sick himself can still heal his patients. Our own weaknesses, our own struggles, they don't disqualify us from helping people or from trying to do better. Perfection isn't where you start. It's the goal you work towards your whole life.
So, after all this, the diagnosis, the doctor, the prescription, what's the end game? What's the goal? The cure these spiritual doctors talk about isn't just about feeling better today. It's bigger than that. It's a transcendent cure that kind of redefines what healing even means.
St. Ambrose, talking about St. Paul's letters, makes it really clear. That ultimate reward, that crown of righteousness, it's not something we get in full here on earth. This life, this is the arena. This is where the fight is. The final healing, the ultimate prize, that comes later.
So what does that mean for the suffering and the illness we feel right now? Well, this famous line from St. Paul flips the script entirely. Weakness, sickness, they're not signs that you're failing. In fact, they can be the very moments where a greater power, a greater grace, can shine through the most. Our struggles can actually have a purpose.
And this brings us right back to where we started. St. Augustine just powerfully sums it all up. True, lasting health, which he calls holiness, it lives in the soul. What happens to the body is secondary. As long as our will, our soul, stays on the right path, our core well-being is safe, no matter what happens to us physically.
And that kind of leaves us with one big question to think about. In our culture, which is just obsessed with physical perfection, with diets and anti-aging, this ancient wisdom is challenging us to ask something deeper. What does it truly mean to be healthy? Maybe the most important diagnosis we'll ever get isn't about our bodies at all, but about our souls.